Imagine a world where the US is no longer the linchpin of global order. For decades, American leadership shaped alliances and trade, but that era is fading fast. Recent administrations have turned inward, closing markets and leaving allies uncertain. The Trans-Pacific Partnership was meant to anchor US influence in Asia, but America walked away, leaving partners adrift. Now, even our closest friends question our reliability as we retreat from the very system we built. The world is moving on, and America's absence is being felt everywhere. The US has shifted from global leader to unpredictable partner, straining even our strongest alliances. European trust in America has plummeted, with leaders openly seeking independence from US influence. Meanwhile, rivals like China and Russia are forging closer ties, exploiting the vacuum left by American withdrawal. For the first time, traditional allies are considering cooperation without us, or even against us. America's inward turn is isolating us on the world stage. The question now, can our alliances survive if we keep turning our backs? Access to the US market once bound allies to us, but protectionism is now the new normal. Tariffs and trade barriers are pushing partners away, disrupting supply chains and raising costs at home. Allies are seeking new markets and forging ties with each other, and even with China. America's retreat from openness is creating a strategic vacuum others are eager to fill. Every closed door weakens our influence and global standing. The world is learning to move forward without American leadership. Both parties now reject free trade, reflecting deep voter anxiety about globalization. Protectionism is bipartisan, leaving allies dismayed and uncertain about America's commitment. The TPP's collapse and continued tariffs show that U.S. trade policy is now about domestic politics, not global leadership. Even under internationalist rhetoric, America's actions exclude partners and prioritize homegrown interests. Allies see this as a long-term shift, not a passing phase. They're adapting by seeking new alliances and greater self-reliance. Nowhere is America's retreat felt more than in Asia, where allies once relied on us to balance China. The U.S. withdrawal from the TPP left a leadership vacuum, forcing partners to forge new trade blocs without us. Japan and South Korea are now deepening ties with China, drifting from the U.S.-centered order. This isn't just an Asian issue. It signals a global shift away from American leadership. As allies hedge their bets, the world is learning to operate without U.S. support. Once this process starts, reversing it may be impossible. No alliance has been more central to post-war American security and global stability than NATO, the cornerstone of transatlantic cooperation. For over 70 years, it stood as a powerful deterrent, a collective shield that guaranteed the security of its members through the principle of mutual defense. This alliance was more than a military pact. It was a community of shared values, a testament to the belief that our security was inextricably linked to that of our European partners. The Trump administration, however, viewed this historic commitment not as a sacred trust, but as a transactional burden. It launched a sustained and honestly unprecedented assault on the very foundations of the alliance, questioning its relevance and openly musing about withdrawing the United States from its obligations, sending shockwaves of alarm and disbelief across Europe. President Trump's rhetoric consistently framed NATO allies not as partners but as freeloaders, delinquent tenants failing to pay their rent for American protection. He fixated on the 2% of GDP defense spending guideline, transforming it from an aspirational goal into a rigid, non-negotiable demand. This public shaming of leaders from countries like Germany and Canada during summits created deep and lasting resentment, undermining the spirit of solidarity that is the lifeblood of the alliance. His repeated threats to not honor Article 5, the collective defense clause for nations he deemed insufficiently paid up, struck at the heart of NATO's credibility. This was no longer just about burden sharing. It was a fundamental questioning of America's willingness to stand by its allies in their moment of greatest need. The consequences of this approach have been profound, forcing European leaders to confront a reality they had long avoided, the possibility of a future without the United States as a reliable security guarantor. This has accelerated a push for strategic autonomy, a concept once debated in academic circles that is now a driving force in European policy. Leaders like Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz and France's President Emmanuel Macron have begun to speak openly about the need for Europe to build its own independent military capabilities and a defense industrial base. This is not a project born of ambition, but of necessity, a defensive reaction to the perceived abandonment by their most powerful ally, creating a fissure in the Western alliance that our adversaries are, quite frankly, eager to exploit. This alienation extends beyond mere rhetoric. The administration's actions, such as the abrupt decision to withdraw U.S. troops from Germany without proper consultation, were seen as punitive and destabilizing. These moves were not coordinated with allies to enhance collective security, but were announced in a manner that seemed designed to sow division and uncertainty. The result is a dangerous erosion of trust. European nations are now hedging their bets, questioning whether they can rely on American intelligence, military planning, or political will. The Trump administration's approach has not made NATO stronger. It has weakened its cohesion and planted dangerous seeds of doubt about America's commitment, pushing Europe to seek security elsewhere. The Trump administration's aggressive trade policy moved beyond the bipartisan drift toward protectionism and into the realm of open economic warfare, even against its closest allies. The signature tool of this conflict was the tariff, wielded not as a scalpel for targeted disputes, but as a sledgehammer against entire sectors and nations. In a move that stunned and angered European partners, the administration imposed steep tariffs on steel and aluminum imports, justifying the action on the flimsy pretext of national security. This claim was particularly galling to allies in Europe and Canada, who have fought alongside the United States for generations. It was a clear signal that, under this administration, long-standing friendships offered no immunity from punitive economic measures. These trade wars were not confined to heavy industry. They quickly escalated to encompass a wide range of goods, from French wine and cheese to German automobiles, creating a chaotic and unpredictable global trade environment. The administration's approach was relentlessly confrontational, viewing trade as a zero-sum game where any surplus for another country was a direct loss for the United States. This perspective ignored the complex realities of modern supply chains, where components cross borders multiple times before a final product is assembled. By imposing these broad tariffs, the administration was not only punishing its partners, but also raising costs for American manufacturers and consumers, introducing a level of volatility that made business planning a nightmare. The weaponization of tariffs had a corrosive effect on diplomatic relationships, turning economic negotiations into bitter, acrimonious disputes. Allies who expected to be consulted and treated as partners found themselves blindsided by presidential tweets and unilateral decrees. The trust that underpins any healthy economic relationship was systematically dismantled. Instead of working together to confront shared challenges, such as China's unfair trade practices, the administration chose to pick fights with everyone simultaneously. This America-alone strategy left the United States isolated, undermining its ability to build the broad coalitions needed to effectively pressure Beijing to change its behavior. It was, honestly, a self-defeating strategy that alienated friends without taming rivals. The lasting damage of these trade wars is the precedent they set. The administration demonstrated a willingness to use national security as a catch-all justification for protectionism, a tactic that other countries could easily adopt against the United States in the future. It shattered the consensus that trade disputes among allies should be resolved through negotiation and established international bodies like the World Trade Organization. Instead, it normalized the use of raw economic power to coerce and punish, even friends. This has made the world a more dangerous and less predictable place for American businesses, weakening the very rules-based system that the United States created and long championed for its own benefit. The Trump administration's alienation of allies was not limited to security and trade. It was driven by a broader philosophical rejection of multilateralism itself. This was most vividly demonstrated by its withdrawal from a series of landmark international agreements and organizations that formed the bedrock of the post-war global order. The decision to pull the United States out of the Paris Agreement on climate change was a particularly stark example. It signaled to the world that America was abdicating its leadership role on one of the most pressing global challenges of our time, leaving a vacuum that other nations, notably China, were all too happy to fill. This move was seen by allies not just as an irresponsible policy choice, but as a betrayal of a shared global responsibility. This pattern of withdrawal continued across a range of critical international forums. The administration pulled out of the United Nations Human Rights Council, criticizing it as a biased and ineffective body, thereby diminishing U.S. influence to shape its agenda from within. It also withdrew from UNESCO, the UN's educational, scientific, and cultural organization. Perhaps most alarmingly for global security, President Trump unilaterally withdrew the United States from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal, which had been painstakingly negotiated alongside our key European allies, Britain, France, and Germany. This decision not only fractured the transatlantic consensus on Iran, but also isolated the U.S. and severely damaged its credibility in future diplomatic negotiations. The administration also took a deeply hostile stance toward institutions that have been central to global economic stability, such as the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. While stopping short of full withdrawal, it accused them of failing to align with the president's agenda and threatened to starve them of funding, creating deep uncertainty about their future. Its most damaging act in this arena was the crippling of the World Trade Organization. By blocking appointments to the WTO's appellate body, the institution's Supreme Court for trade disputes, the administration effectively paralyzed the world's primary mechanism for resolving trade conflicts, pushing the global economy further toward a lawless, power-based system where might makes right. Each withdrawal was presented to the domestic audience as a victory for American sovereignty, a casting off of constraints imposed by ungrateful foreigners. To the rest of the world, however, it looked like an act of global vandalism. It showed an America that was no longer interested in building, sustaining, or even participating in the international systems it had created. This retreat from global commitments has left the world more fragmented and dangerous. It has told our allies that America's signature on an agreement is no longer its bond, and that its partnership cannot be relied upon from one administration to the next, a devastating blow to the trust required for collective action. Beyond specific policies on trade and security, the Trump administration's style of diplomacy inflicted its own unique and lasting damage on global alliances. It was characterized by a startling disregard for established diplomatic norms, replacing careful negotiation and private consultation with public insults, impulsive declarations via social media, and a transactional approach that reduced long-standing relationships to mere business deals. Allies were frequently caught off guard, learning of major U.S. policy shifts that directly affected their security and economic interests from a late-night tweet rather than a diplomatic cable or a phone call. This chaotic and unpredictable method of statecraft made it nearly impossible for foreign governments to conduct serious, long-term policy planning with Washington. This erosion of diplomatic protocol was accompanied by a deeply personal and often vindictive approach to foreign leaders. Allies were no longer treated with the respect befitting sovereign partners, but were often subjected to public dressing downs or private browbeating. The infamous G7 summit in Canada in 2018, where President Trump abruptly withdrew his endorsement of the joint communiqué and publicly insulted the host, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, was a watershed moment. It demonstrated to a global audience that even the most steadfast and historically friendly neighbors were not immune to the president's ire. This behavior fostered an environment of fear and mistrust, where allied leaders felt they had to walk on eggshells, unsure of what might provoke a hostile reaction. The administration's cavalier treatment of classified information further poisoned the well of trust, particularly within the intelligence community. The 2017 incident where President Trump reportedly shared highly classified intelligence from Israel with Russian officials in the Oval Office sent a chill through our intelligence-sharing partnerships. These relationships are built on the absolute assurance that sensitive sources and methods will be protected. When allies fear that the information they provide could be compromised or used against their interests, they will inevitably become more cautious about what they share. This reluctance to share vital intelligence directly harms U.S. national security, blinding us to potential threats and weakening our collective ability to respond to crises. Ultimately, this period has been defined by the systematic destruction of the most crucial yet intangible asset in foreign policy: trust. Trust is the currency of alliances. It is the belief that a partner will honor its commitments, act with a degree of predictability, and consider shared interests when making decisions. The Trump administration's actions have depleted this reservoir of trust, perhaps irreparably. Rebuilding it will take more than a change in policy or a friendlier tone. It will require a sustained demonstration over many years that the United States is once again a reliable and predictable partner. For now, our allies are left to wonder if the erratic and alienating behavior of the last few years represents a temporary storm or a permanent change in the American climate. A global retreat from Washington is no longer a distant hypothetical. It is an unfolding reality with tangible and painful effects on the American economy. For decades, the United States has been able to finance its staggering national debt with relative ease, a profligacy made possible by the world's unwavering faith in the U.S. dollar and the stability of American financial markets. Foreign governments, central banks, and private investors have flocked to purchase U.S. Treasury bonds, viewing them as the safest possible haven for their capital. This global demand has kept our borrowing costs artificially low, allowing Washington to sustain deficit spending on a scale that would cripple most other nations. It is a unique and hard-earned privilege, one that has underwritten American prosperity and power for generations. But this privilege is not a birthright, and we are now actively destroying it. The combination of erratic tariff policies and a fiscal approach that promises to push the national debt to unprecedented heights is a toxic cocktail for investor confidence. When allies and investors can no longer predict U.S. policy, when they see trade rules rewritten on a whim, and budgets that seem disconnected from economic reality, they begin to question the fundamental safety of their investments. Countries that once reliably parked their reserves in U.S. treasuries may begin to demand higher interest rates to compensate for the increased risk, imposing ever higher costs on Washington just to service its existing debt. The May downgrade of the United States credit rating by Moody's should have been a deafening alarm bell, a clear warning that the world is taking notice of our self-destructive behavior. The consequences of this eroding confidence will ripple through every corner of the American economy. It's not just about the cost of government borrowing. A flight from U.S. assets would mean less foreign capital flowing into our markets, which could lead to a weaker dollar, higher inflation, and constrained economic growth. The very stability that has made America an attractive destination for global investment is being put at risk. Investors cherish not only the growth potential of U.S. markets, but also the robust rule of law, the regulatory independence, and the political stability that have long been hallmarks of the American system. When an administration attacks its own institutions and norms, it undermines the very foundation that global investors rely upon. Furthermore, as we erect barriers to our own market, we are simultaneously encouraging the rest of the world to build economic systems that bypass us entirely. Foreign governments, seeing the writing on the wall, will have every incentive to use subsidies, regulations, and strategic partnerships to create new supply chains that deliberately exclude American-made components and technology. This isn't merely about finding new customers, it's a strategic imperative to insulate their economies from American political volatility. The result will be a gradual but relentless redirection of global trade and investment flows away from the United States, leaving American companies and workers increasingly isolated from the dynamic centers of global growth that they once dominated. If Washington continues to slam the door on foreign goods, it should come as no surprise when our trading partners walk down the hall to knock on other doors. The world economy is not static. It will reconfigure itself around new centers of gravity if the old one proves too unstable. We're already seeing this happen in real time, as our allies, driven by necessity, increase their economic integration with one another at the direct expense of American companies and strategic interests. They're not doing this out of spite, but out of a pragmatic need for survival, in a world where their most powerful partner has become their most unpredictable one. Every protectionist measure enacted in Washington is another brick in the foundation of a new global economic architecture that is being designed to function without us. The most striking evidence of this shift comes from Asia, the very region where our economic leadership is most critical to counterbalancing China. In March, a truly remarkable summit took place. Japan and South Korea, our two most important treaty allies in the region, held high-level trade talks with China. These are two nations whose security and prosperity have been intimately linked to the United States for over 70 years. Yet, in the face of American economic disengagement, they jointly announced a plan with Beijing to pursue a new trilateral free trade agreement. Their stated goal was to create a predictable trade and investment environment in the region, a clear, if diplomatic, rebuke of the chaotic unpredictability emanating from Washington. This development is strategically catastrophic for the United States. Washington's entire Indo-Pacific strategy hinges on our ability to work with key partners like Japan and South Korea to create economies of scale and build resilient supply chains that are not dependent on China. Tokyo and Seoul are the twin anchors of non-Chinese Asian economic dynamism, home to some of the world's most innovative and technologically advanced companies. Without their full and enthusiastic partnership, American efforts to compete with and marginalize China's state-driven economic model are simply not viable. By pushing them toward deeper economic ties with Beijing, we are actively undermining our own long-term strategic objectives and handing our chief rival a monumental victory. This trend is not limited to Asia. Across the globe, nations are recalculating their interests. The European Union is accelerating its efforts to sign trade deals in Latin America and Asia. Regional blocs are gaining new importance as countries band together to increase their collective bargaining power. The very multilateral institutions that the U.S. championed for decades are now becoming venues for coordinating a response to American protectionism. The world is moving on, building a web of economic relationships that is denser, more diverse, and less centered on the United States. We thought we were punishing the world by restricting access to our market, but we may find that we have only succeeded in punishing ourselves by becoming irrelevant to theirs. The ultimate symbol of American global power is not an aircraft carrier, it is the dollar. For decades, its centrality to the global economy has granted the United States what former French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing famously called an exorbitant privilege. Because global trade, from oil to coffee, is predominantly priced in dollars, and because central banks hold the bulk of their reserves in dollar-denominated assets, we have been able to exert immense influence over the global financial system. This dominance allows us to finance our debts cheaply and to wield powerful economic sanctions as a primary tool of our foreign policy. The dollar's status is the ultimate backstop of American influence, a pillar so foundational that its erosion was once almost unthinkable. Yet, the unthinkable is now being actively discussed in finance ministries and central banks around the world. Our own policies are accelerating the search for alternatives. The frequent and broad use of financial sanctions, while effective in the short term, has prompted both adversaries and allies to explore ways to de-dollarize their economies to shield themselves from Washington's reach. Nations like China and Russia are leading the charge, creating parallel payment systems and increasing trade in their own currencies. But the concern is spreading. Even allied nations are growing uneasy about their vulnerability, wondering if they too could one day find themselves on the wrong side of an American sanction for a simple policy disagreement. This search for alternatives is no longer just a theoretical exercise. We are seeing concrete steps being taken. Major emerging economies like the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively developing mechanisms for mutual trade and investment that bypass the dollar. The rise of digital currencies offers another potential pathway for transactions to occur outside the traditional, U.S.-controlled financial infrastructure. While no single currency is poised to replace the dollar overnight, the trend is toward a more multipolar currency world. The emergence of several viable alternatives, even if they only capture a fraction of global trade, would begin to chip away at the dollar's market share, and with it, our exorbitant privilege. The strategic consequences of a world less reliant on the dollar would be severe. Our ability to impose sanctions would be dramatically weakened, robbing us of a critical foreign policy tool short of military action. Our borrowing costs would inevitably rise as global demand for dollars and U.S. Treasury bonds wanes, placing immense strain on the federal budget and the domestic economy. The very perception of American power would be diminished. Losing the dollar's centrality would be a quiet but devastating blow, an economic dethroning that would signal a definitive end to the era of unchallenged American leadership. We are, through our own actions, encouraging the world to build a financial system that no longer needs us at its center. America's economic dynamism has always been fueled by more than just domestic talent. It has been a magnet for the world's brightest minds and most ambitious investors. The promise of stable markets, predictable regulations, and a culture that celebrates innovation has drawn a steady flow of foreign direct investment, powering our tech hubs, expanding our factories, and creating high-paying American jobs. This influx of global capital and talent is a massive competitive advantage, constantly renewing our economic vitality. But this advantage is predicated on a foundation of trust and stability, the very foundation that recent U.S. policy seems determined to crack. An exodus of investors, both foreign and domestic, is a real and growing danger. The Trump administration's ill-conceived tariffs and the constant threat of new trade wars have injected a massive dose of volatility into the market, making long-term business planning practically impossible. How can a company confidently invest millions in a new U.S. factory when it doesn't know if the components it needs to import will be hit with a 25% tariff tomorrow? This uncertainty is poison to investment. Compounding this, the Republican legislative agenda championed by Trump, with its focus on unfunded tax cuts, threatens to explode the deficit and stoke inflation, further destabilizing the economic environment and deterring the kind of patient capital that builds lasting prosperity. The damage is not just economic, it's reputational. The association of America's world-leading technology titans with an administration that has openly attacked democratic institutions. The rule of law and government agencies is tarnishing their global brands. International customers and partners are becoming wary, questioning the reliability and even the security of American technology. When they see U.S. tech platforms become battlegrounds in domestic political fights, it damages adoption rates and market value abroad. In a competitive global marketplace, trust is a key differentiator. By politicizing our most innovative sectors, we are imperiling their global leadership and encouraging the world to seek out or develop less fraught alternatives. This creates a vicious cycle. Less foreign investment means fewer jobs and slower innovation at home. A damaged global reputation for our tech firms means less market share abroad and fewer resources to reinvest in research and development. According to defense analyst Todd Harrison, even the proposed defense budget under Trump would result in significant cuts compared to previous projections, weakening the military-industrial complex that has long been a driver of technological breakthroughs. This is a comprehensive agenda for weakness, not strength. By creating an environment of instability and damaging our most innovative brands, we are not making America stronger. We are actively encouraging the world's capital and talent to go elsewhere. In the shadowy world of global security, nothing is more valuable than timely and accurate intelligence. And honestly, no nation has benefited more from its collection and dissemination than the United States. Our ability to preempt terrorist attacks, track adversaries, and understand global threats is profoundly dependent on a dense web of intelligence sharing partnerships built over decades. This cooperation is not a one-way street. We receive as much as we give, often gaining critical insights from allies with unique regional access and human sources. This entire ecosystem, however, is built on a single fragile commodity: trust. Allies must believe that any sensitive information they share will be protected with the utmost care and will never be used to their disadvantage. This sacred trust, the bedrock of intelligence cooperation, was severely shaken during Donald Trump's first term. Allies learned, to their horror, that the American president could be shockingly cavalier with their most sensitive secrets. The infamous May 2017 incident, where President Trump casually discussed highly classified information about a terrorist plot, intelligence provided by Israel, with senior Russian officials visiting the Oval Office, sent a seismic shockwave through the global intelligence community. For our partners, this was not just a diplomatic gaffe. It was a catastrophic breach of protocol that potentially endangered lives and compromised years of painstaking intelligence work. The message was clear. The White House could no longer be trusted as a secure repository for shared secrets. The reasons for concern have only intensified during his second term, creating a climate of pervasive anxiety among our intelligence partners. In a stunning lapse of operational security this past March, a number of Trump's cabinet officials reportedly used Signal, an unclassified commercial messaging app, to discuss and coordinate classified details surrounding an imminent U.S. military strike on Houthi militants in Yemen. Such blatant disregard for basic security protocols demonstrates a systemic problem that goes far beyond a single individual's indiscretion. This kind of laxity forces allied intelligence agencies to make an agonizing calculation. Is the benefit of sharing information with Washington worth the risk of it being compromised through incompetence or indifference? This growing caution will have dire consequences for American security. Foreign intelligence services will inevitably become more guarded, sharing less information, redacting more details, and perhaps delaying the transmission of time-sensitive intelligence until they can be certain of its handling. They may choose to circumvent American channels altogether, creating smaller, more trusted intelligence circles that exclude the United States. This will create blind spots for American policymakers and military commanders. leaving us more vulnerable to surprise and less able to protect our interests and citizens abroad. The fraying of this vital fabric of cooperation is a direct threat to our national security, a self-inflicted wound born from the erosion of trust. The immense power of the United States military is not self-contained. Its ability to project force across the globe is fundamentally dependent on a vast network of partners and allies. We often speak of American military might in terms of aircraft carriers and stealth bombers, but the true enabler of this power is logistics. The unglamorous but essential web of basing rights, overflight permissions, and access to ports and airfields around the world. Without the ability to use ports in Belgium and Germany, a surge of forces to the Middle East would be exponentially slower and more difficult. Without our sprawling bases in Japan and the Philippines, sustaining any significant combat operation in the Pacific against a peer competitor like China would be practically impossible. This logistical network is not guaranteed. It is granted by sovereign nations who must answer to their own populations. As antipathy toward U.S. policies grows, fueled by an administration seen as arrogant and indifferent to allied concerns, it will become increasingly difficult for foreign governments to provide the support we need. Imagine a crisis erupting in the Middle East, and a German chancellor facing a hostile public, feeling unable to grant access to Ramstein Air Base, a critical hub for American military transport and medical evacuations. Consider the challenge of countering terrorism in Central Asia if Pakistan, weary of American pressure, were to deny permission to transit its airspace. Our military power is not autarkic. It is built on relationships that we are now actively poisoning. The Trump administration's approach to managing our own military further exacerbates this problem, making the U.S. a less capable and less reliable partner. Some of the Army's most elite, highly trained combat units are being diverted from essential readiness exercises at the National Training Center. Their new mission? Assisting with immigration enforcement at the border with Mexico. By prioritizing domestic political agendas over core military preparedness, our armed forces will inevitably lose the operational proficiency that makes them a valuable ally. A less ready, less available U.S. military is a less attractive partner for nations facing real security threats, giving them one more reason to question the value of aligning with Washington. Furthermore, allies may grow wary of acquiring U.S.-made weaponry, a trend that would have devastating consequences for military interoperability. They may fear that in a crisis, Washington or even a private American company could deny them permission to use the very systems they purchased for their own defense. This is precisely what happened when Elon Musk denied Ukraine the ability to use his Starlink communications network for a planned attack on Russian forces in 2022. This incident was a wake-up call for the world. If allies choose to buy non-U.S. equipment to ensure their autonomy, it will chip away at one of the central advantages our alliances enjoy, the ability of our militaries to fight together seamlessly, a capability that our adversaries cannot easily match. One of the most critical functions of America's global alliance network is extended deterrence, the security umbrella that protects our friends from their enemies. The simple, unspoken promise that an attack on an ally is an attack on the United States has been a powerful force for peace and stability in Europe and Asia for decades. It has dissuaded aggressors and given our partners the confidence to resist coercion without having to develop their own nuclear arsenals. This pillar of the post-Cold War order, however, has been profoundly weakened by President Trump, who consistently calls into question the reliability of these solemn security guarantees. His transactional view of alliances has turned our commitments into commodities to be haggled over, not sacred pacts to be honored. President Trump routinely demonstrates a galling indifference to the security of treaty allies, particularly those that do not spend what he personally considers to be an adequate amount on defense. His shameful rhetoric suggesting he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to NATO members he deems delinquent is not just campaign trail bluster. It is a corrosive acid eating away at the foundation of collective security. Adversaries listen to these statements, and they see an opportunity. Allies listen, and they feel a terrifying sense of abandonment. A stark example came in 2019, when Iranian proxies launched a major attack on critical oil facilities in Saudi Arabia. The Trump administration chose not to retaliate, and the world took note that America's security guarantees might not be ironclad after all. This erosion of deterrence is further compounded by the administration's overt disdain for the moral dimensions of foreign policy. The president's shameful equivocation, equating Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine with that country's heroic defense of its sovereignty, has shattered the global perception of basic American decency. For years, the imperfect but genuine sense that the U.S. stood for certain values, democracy, freedom, and the rule of law, attracted cooperation from like-minded countries. When U.S. policies become overtly immoral and transactional, making them indistinguishable from the cynical realpolitik of China and Russia, we lose our unique appeal. Why would a country side with an unpredictable and amoral America when they could bet on a more predictable authoritarian power? This creates a perilous situation for our allies, particularly those on the front lines. A Russian encroachment into the territory of a Baltic NATO member, for example, coupled with nuclear threats, could present a terrifying test for a fractured West. An American administration unwilling to trade New York for Tallinn might hesitate, and key European allies like France, Germany, and the United Kingdom might fold under the immense pressure. A Europe consumed by such profound insecurity would be in no position to assist Washington with challenges elsewhere, from Chinese aggression to Iran's nuclear ambitions. The deterioration of American deterrence doesn't make our allies stronger. It makes them more fearful, more likely to appease aggressors, and less able to act as effective partners. The Trump administration appears to be making a dangerous and deeply flawed bet, gambling the future of American leadership on a series of faulty assumptions. One of these is the belief that, no matter how much Washington alienates its partners, they will ultimately have no choice but to stick with the United States. This view relies on the perceived antipathy that our democratic allies feel toward the authoritarian ideologies of our rivals: China, Iran, North Korea, and Russia. The logic suggests that, when push comes to shove, shared democratic values will trump any disagreements over trade or security, and our allies will dutifully fall back in line. It is a comforting thought, but one that is dangerously out of touch with the realities of modern geopolitics and recent history. We need only look at the recent past to see the holes in this theory. Following Russia's illegal invasion and annexation of Crimea in 2014, our European allies easily overcame their ideological objections and continued to pursue lucrative trade and energy deals with Moscow. Similarly, deep and growing economic ties with China have continued unabated, despite Beijing's brutal repression of the Uyghur minority and its systematic dismantling of freedoms in Hong Kong. This demonstrates that, when faced with a choice between ideological solidarity and perceived national interest, many countries will prioritize the latter. Values matter, sure, but they are often not the deciding factor in foreign policy, especially when a country feels its economic or security needs are not being met by its traditional partners. Furthermore, the Trump administration itself has rendered this argument moot through its own actions and rhetoric. The president has made it abundantly clear that he hardly considers ideological differences to be an obstacle to cooperation, especially with autocrats he admires. His repeated warmth toward Russia's Vladimir Putin and his praise for other strongmen have demonstrated that a mismatch in values is no barrier to a friendly relationship, at least from his perspective. In a May address to investors and Saudi leaders, Trump assured them that his administration would not be giving you lectures on how to live or how to govern your own affairs. This is a clear signal to the world that America is no longer in the business of promoting democracy or human rights. If Washington itself does not act as if ideology matters, it is the height of folly to expect others to base their strategic decisions on it. By stripping our foreign policy of its moral and ideological core, we are, in effect, telling the world that all partnerships are purely transactional. This puts us on the same level as China and Russia, who have long offered partnerships devoid of lectures on internal affairs. When we abandon our unique position as the leader of the free world, we force our allies into a cold, hard calculus. They will weigh the benefits of partnering with an unpredictable and amoral America against the benefits of partnering with a more predictable, if authoritarian, power. That is a contest we are not guaranteed to win. Another potential rationale for the Trump administration's approach is that it sees alliance management as little more than a distraction. In this view, the endless consultations and compromises required to maintain partnerships are an impediment to the real contest, the great power competition with China. This position, ironically, is a twisted continuation of a logic also present in the Biden administration. The idea that the most important thing for America is to strengthen itself at home. The theory goes that if we build the best economy, develop the most innovative technology, and field the strongest military, the rest of the world will have no choice but to gravitate toward us. People, after all, like to back a winner. This logic contains a kernel of truth but misses the most critical part of the equation. Strength alone is not enough to attract and retain allies. A strong America that benefits only itself is not an attractive partner. It is a threat. Global support will not magically materialize if other nations feel they are being actively excluded from the fruits of American success. Why would countries rally to our side if they are denied access to our markets, preventing them from sharing in our prosperity? Why would they adopt American technology if they fear it could be used against them, or that its purveyors are politically toxic? And what value does the world's strongest military offer them if it provides no genuine protection for their security? We should, of course, strive to strengthen ourselves. A robust economy, a vibrant tech sector, and a powerful military are essential foundations of national power. But when this strengthening is pursued in a unilateral, isolationist manner, it becomes counterproductive. Instead of drawing others toward us, it forces them to shield themselves from us. When allies perceive American power as arbitrary and self-serving, they will not seek to align with it. They will seek to insulate themselves from it. They will build redundant supply chains, develop their own technological standards, and pursue regional security arrangements that limit their exposure to American unpredictability. Strength without partnership is not leadership. It is merely dominance, and dominance inspires resistance, not loyalty. And if the true goal of the Trump administration is to make America stronger at home to be stronger abroad, it is going about it in a truly bizarre and self-defeating way. The administration's chaotic tariffs are increasing market volatility and making rational business planning a practical impossibility, weakening our economy. The fiscal policies being championed are projected to explode the national deficit and fuel inflation, creating long-term instability. The constant political attacks on our own institutions and the rule of law are damaging the global brands of our most valuable companies. This is not an agenda for strength. It is a blueprint for weakness, one that undermines our domestic foundations while simultaneously alienating the partners we need to succeed globally. In the end, the architects of this America alone policy seem to be destroying everything that makes the United States an attractive and indispensable partner. They do this because they fundamentally fail to imagine just how bad a world order that is actively hostile to American interests would be. Our position as the world's leading power was never inevitable. It was earned in the aftermath of the Cold War by taking on the immense responsibility for the security and prosperity of other nations. We created a system, and in exchange for others playing by rules that we largely established and enforced, we underwrote their success. If the United States itself is the one to abandon those rules and tear down that system, we will quickly become wholly expendable. Future historians will likely look back on this era with profound bewilderment. They will see a nation that achieved a level of unprecedented global dominance in the post-Cold War period and found that maintaining it was relatively easy and inexpensive. They will note the errors made by all of Trump's predecessors, some of which certainly diminished U.S. influence and aided our adversaries. But they will also note a crucial difference. None of those predecessors intended to produce such outcomes. They made mistakes in the pursuit of maintaining American leadership. In stark contrast, Donald Trump actively seeks a world where the United States, while perhaps still rich and powerful, no longer shoulders the burden or reaps the benefits of shaping the global order to its advantage. The president has often projected a desire to lead a country that is feared rather than loved, invoking a Machiavellian cliché, but his approach is unlikely to achieve either emotion. To be truly feared, a nation must possess not only immense power, but also the credible will to use it to protect its interests and enforce its demands. The administration's policies are weakening our economy, fraying our military readiness, and signaling to the world that our commitments are worthless. To be loved, or at least respected, a nation must be seen as a reliable, predictable, and beneficial partner. We are systematically destroying that perception. If we stay on this path, the United States risks a far worse fate, becoming too brutal to be loved, but too irrelevant to be feared. The consequences of this trajectory are already in motion. The alliances that took decades of careful diplomacy to build will continue to wither. Our rivals will not hesitate to exploit the vacuum we leave behind. Some of our partners may hold out for a time, clinging to the hope that their American friends will come to their senses and attempt to reclaim their traditional leadership role. But their faith has been broken, and trust, once shattered, is nearly impossible to fully restore. They will not wait forever, even for a partial American return to form. Soon they will be forced to move on and make their own arrangements for their security and prosperity. And when they do, so will the rest of the world. America's indispensability was a choice, not a destiny. Now, a new choice is being made, to become expendable. We stand at a historic crossroads, a moment of profound and perilous choice for the United States. The grand edifice of American global leadership, so carefully constructed over generations, now risks being dismantled by our own hands. The central argument of the Trump administration, and a sentiment that has been brewing for years, is that America can retreat from its global responsibilities to focus on strengthening itself from within. This is a seductive but deeply flawed premise. It fundamentally misunderstands the source of American power, which has never been derived from isolation, but from our unique ability to build and lead a global network of allies and partners who see their own success as intertwined with ours. This is the great strategic asset we are now squandering with breathtaking speed. The damage being inflicted is not merely a matter of shifting policies or temporary diplomatic spats. It is a deep, structural erosion of the most vital component of any alliance trust. For decades, the world operated on the assumption that America's word was its bond, that our security guarantees were ironclad, and that our commitment to a rules-based order was steadfast. That assumption has been shattered. When a president openly questions the value of NATO, weaponizes trade against the closest of friends, and treats solemn treaties as disposable contracts, it sends a message that echoes in every capital around the world. The message is that the United States is no longer a reliable partner, but an unpredictable and self-interested actor. This breach of trust will be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to fully repair. A future administration may attempt to reverse course, extending an olive branch to our alienated allies and recommitting to international cooperation. But the world has learned a harsh lesson. Our partners now know that American foreign policy can pivot on the outcome of a single election, that the nation's core strategic orientation is no longer stable or predictable. They will forever hedge their bets, diversifying their partnerships and building structures of security and commerce that are less dependent on Washington. They may welcome a friendlier America back to the table, but they will never again place all their faith in its leadership. The memory of this abandonment will linger for decades. Therefore, we must be clear-eyed about the future. There is no going back to the world as it was. The self-inflicted wounds to America's credibility have set in motion a global realignment that will continue regardless of who occupies the Oval Office. Allies are already forging new paths, driven by the necessity of survival in a world where they can no longer count on the United States. Our rivals are seizing this historic opportunity to expand their influence and offer an alternative model of leadership, one that promises stability without lectures on values. The retreat of American leadership is creating a vacuum, and as we have seen time and again throughout history, such vacuums are always filled. The ultimate tragedy of this path is the future it promises for the United States, a future of isolation in a world we no longer lead. The vision of a fortified America strong and secure behind its borders, while the rest of the world fends for itself, is a dangerous illusion. Our prosperity is inextricably linked to global markets. Our security depends on intelligence from our allies, and our ability to influence world events is magnified 100-fold through our partnerships. An America that stands alone is not a stronger America, it is a more vulnerable one. It is a nation that will have to face every threat by itself, bear every burden by itself, and pay every cost by itself. This is not a strategy for greatness, it is a recipe for decline. As we have explored, the consequences are already unfolding across every domain. Economically, we risk the slow erosion of the dollar's dominance and an exodus of the investment that fuels our innovation. Strategically, our military will find itself constrained, unable to project power, without the logistical support of allies who no longer trust us. In the critical realm of intelligence, we will be left increasingly blind as partners withhold vital information. We are trading the immense advantages of being the world's convener, the hub of a global network, for the lonely and diminished status of just another powerful country, feared by some, respected by few, and trusted by none. The choice to abandon the system of rules and responsibilities that America created will leave us expendable. We will have surrendered the moral high ground, making our foreign policy indistinguishable from the cynical power politics of our rivals. In such a world, other nations will not rally to our side out of shared values. They will make cold, pragmatic calculations about where their interests lie. Often they will conclude that their interests are best served by accommodating our adversaries or by creating regional blocs that exclude us. The United States risks becoming a lonely superpower, possessing immense military and economic might, but lacking the influence and partnerships needed to effectively deploy it in pursuit of our long-term interests. In the final analysis, the story of the coming years will be one of irreversible loss. The loss of trust, the loss of influence, and the loss of the unique role that America has played in the world for nearly a century. This is not a destiny being forced upon us, but a choice we are actively making. We are choosing to walk away from the table of global leadership content to watch as others redraw the map of the 21st century. The world will indeed move on, as it must. The question that will haunt future generations of Americans is why their predecessors, at a moment of unprecedented advantage, chose to become so brutal as to be unloved and yet so irrelevant as to be unfeared. The world is changing, and America risks being left behind. Our legacy is being written now. Will it be one of leadership or one of loss?